even as a team, we're shifting narrative just by existing, just by doing things that people think that we can't do. And I feel like that's a really powerful thing, because on one hand, it changes people's mindset that is narrow-minded from like maybe when they go to another show and they see a female performer who's a rapper, they're not going to have that preconceived notion that she's not going to be good. But then on top of it, it also allows, I'm hoping, those people who do get pushed out of those spaces and who do feel like they can't occupy certain space to be like, oh, but she did it. She's a female rapper, and I haven't seen that before, but now I'm seeing it. So, like, maybe I could do it too.
Welcome to Season 2 of Making Conversation with me, Grant Brydon. I've been sitting down with some of my favourite artists and thinkers to discuss creativity and life for this fortnightly podcast. For this episode, I spoke to Haviah Mighty, a rapper, producer and recording artist from Toronto who won the 2019 Polaris Music Prize with her breakthrough album 13th Floor. Last year she followed up with the Stock Exchange mixtape, which won a Juno Award. She recently joined me fresh off the plane at Levi's Haus of Strauss in London to talk about maintaining balance through the ups and downs of success and how she hopes to implement change through the power of being her authentic self. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe on your preferred podcast provider, and please check out my book, Life Lessons from Hip Hop, which is available now from all good booksellers.
Yeah, I guess it's like the end of a very aggressive summer. We've been touring a lot and doing a lot of different things, shows and kind of like appearances, engagements, stuff like that. So it's really nice to kind of finish it off with the international leg of the tour, so to speak. Right. We just came from L.A. I played my biggest show in L.A. called The Dinosaur. It was a really cool show. Actually, it was in Palm Springs, which is in California, but we stayed in L.A. and then did that, and then now we're here and playing a show here in a couple of days, and then also going to Atlanta for the BET Awards. So yeah, off of the strength of an amazing summer where we kind of went in a bunch of different places within Canada, where I'm from, it's like a great way to kind of like, I guess, end off the trajectory of 2022. Yeah.
How is that sort of mentally to deal with? Because I guess it's gone from a fairly low time into like suddenly all of this high energy. It feels kind of like everything suddenly that was waiting to happen in the pandemic has like happened all at once. Yeah,
it feels like a floodgate opened or something like that, which I guess it's good. The things that are coming are really good. And when I met you, actually, or when we did Great Escape in 2019, the momentum was really, really high. So for 2020 and 2021, things really slowed down. So it's very interesting, kind of the way that I've returned to the UK when I've returned to working. It's like it's really cool to, I guess, keep doing what I think I'm meant to do, and also just take that beyond the borders of where I'm from.
Yeah, definitely. But what's that like, navigating those highs and lows, just sort of internally for you? Like, what's that? What does that feel like?
Extremely polar. I'm not gonna lie, it's really polar. It feels really good, of course, to perform on stages and kind of get outfits ready for like different engagements. There's stress that's associated with it, of course, and it is hard work, of course, but it's so rewarding because at the end of the day, I get the opportunity to talk about my music, talk about my art, which I live and breathe. Yeah. So it's an amazing thing, although it isn't the easiest thing to do. But then, when I go back home, it's like, it's so polar because you go from like people knowing your lyrics and being very excited to meet you, and camera, photography, being ready all the time, to like just regular like grocery shopping and like kind of like not really that feeling of reward happening, and doing laundry and all that regular stuff. Sometimes it's good to kind of go back to that regular stuff, but sometimes it's a bit of a push and pull internally, like a little bit conflicting, like how much value is being contributed when I'm not doing the music stuff. You know what I mean? So I have to remind myself that there is value outside of just making music.
And I guess especially when the up times, I guess, are so intense as they are kind of now, do you feel like almost like that identity of the person who does the laundry sort of gets lost?
100%. They're two different people. I feel like I'm much more in tune with the version of me that is going out there doing my job. The version of me that's learning to be, I don't know, a contributing member to the society outside of an artist. I'm still learning who she is a little bit more. Right. I'm still taking my time with that a bit more.
What do you do to try and connect with that part then?
I try to utilize the time that I have off a bit more intentionally now. So
Right.
like trying to like do specific things that I know that I would enjoy that I don't always have the time to do. You know, I want to get more into fitness again and kind of like start working out more regularly when I'm traveling. It's hard to upkeep that, and you're so tired from the things you're already doing. You don't want to lift weights. But that's also something that I know that before music was taking off, it gave me a lot of happiness, value. It made me eat better as well. They kind of, relied on each other. And so that was a whole system that I created. And because I was working out, I was eating better. Because I was eating better, I was creating better routines, waking up at better times. When it comes to working, like, I'm on somebody else's calendar all the time, or somebody else's schedule all the time. If I'm performing, it's whenever they book the show. The soundtrack is when they tell me to arrive. If everything is just on somebody else's schedule. So I guess I'm learning how to set my own schedule when I have the opportunity to do that and be able to kind of bounce back and forth. And that's, it's a blessing to have that dilemma, but it's not easy,
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think the challenges are then? What are you trying to sort of work through with regards to that?
I think it's just very difficult to have routine when somebody else isn't dictating it. I'm very good at meeting deadlines and doing things on a schedule because I have to, and somebody's going to hold me accountable to it. And I also hold myself accountable when it comes to music. Like, it's a lot easier for me to do that. But when it comes to like other things, that accountability, I think I'm learning to, like introduce that a bit more and listen to myself a bit more.
Right.
And remind myself that there's so much value to me outside of what most people recognize is my value, if that makes sense. Because most people are aware of me as an artist, obviously, as a musician, and I'm so grateful for that. But like, outside of that, it could feel like people don't, they don't care. And it's not that they don't care, they don't know you. That's what regular life is like. So it's getting used to that balance, and I've also had to get used to the balance of being an artist who people care about, because that was also something that wasn't a normality for me just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of adapt to that. And now that I've adapted to that, I feel like I'm getting a lot better at that. I'm almost like, but like I'm falling short paying attention to like that other aspect of life, which is like the main aspect of life when you really think about it.
Yeah.
They like the mental health sector, the self-care, all of that. If that's not right, if that's not okay, it really does filter into and negatively impact the work that I'm trying to do, especially when I'm, trying to make impact. I'm trying to be positive. It's like, if I'm not feeling positive or feeling good or feeling, okay, it's going to be very difficult to do that other aspect. And so those things really balance off of each other. So I'm just playing with that balance, which I think life is, for all of us. It's just, how do we balance all of the different things that we got going on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess as an artist, that's even more heightened because, as you said, there's this external thing that people know you for and care about and are connected to, but then also you've got the you who maybe people don't care about because they don't know. Do you think that you said something before that made me think of like, like learning to trust yourself, and do you think that can be difficult, I guess, when you're in a position where you're getting a lot of external sort of gratification, you're getting awards, you're getting this kind of stuff, and then do you think that sort of affects your ability to trust yourself maybe in some ways?
100%, yeah. I think in addition to the external validation being the thing you rely on to know if you're doing good or not, there's also like working with a team that has opinions on everything that you do as well, and having team members that are great at what they do, from everything to outfit choices, like input, to social media captions and like input on that. So you start to overthink every single thing. You're like, like, I think this outfit looks good, but like, let me tap in with my team, or I'm going to do this post, but let me tap in with my team and make sure I'm not, hurting anyone's feelings, or, you know what I mean? Like, you got to kind of consider them, because they're always kind of considering you and making sure that everything you're doing is like thought through. And then of course, when everything has to be thought through and structured, for me, as someone who used to be a very DIY artist, I used to do everything by myself, do my photo shoots, music videos. I made all my own decisions. It's like very opposite now to have a team. And I remember, it's funny, when I first met my manager, I started working with some artists, and I remember that project I did, 13th Floor, is the first project that people really started to recognize me for. But going into that creation process, I remember being told, like, this is going to move slower than than you're used to. Like, this is, we're going to take our time with this project. And I remember feeling like I was being held back. I
Right.
remember feeling like everything used to move so fast for me. I'd make a song, I put it out in a couple days. You know what I mean? I'd get someone to make the artwork. I'd make all these decisions. And then, when I went into that process, it was like, well, I got to work on this song. And then I got to work with the producer the following week. And then I got to send it to mixing and send it to mastering. And then I got to commission somebody for artwork. But we have to find the right person. It would take months and months and months as opposed to days. That process was very difficult for me. But I think I eventually got used to that process, where now I've understood that in order to create great art that is thought through, you don't want to rush that process. You don't want to just throw something out there, which I used to do, right? So I've learned to kind of take my time. I've learned to kind of take my time with the output and get opinions. That way I can modify if those opinions are something that I actually kind of think has artistic merit, so to speak. And that's been something I've gotten used to. But that DIY version of me, that person that like didn't really need anyone to make decisions, she's a little confused now because she's now used to having this support all the time. And it does make it difficult to kind of trust yourself with certain things. And you have to be able to do that. There's certain things that you not only are there things that you don't want help with, there are things that you just might not have help with as well, So it's really interesting. I don't want to lose sight of the version of me that can like execute on my own, which I'm very good at execution if I put my mind to it. Anything I put my mind to, I know I can do it. But sometimes if you put your mind to something and you're not sure if that team you've developed okays it, that's where it gets weird. Like, oh, like can I do this thing, or should I not do this thing? So I'm just, again, balance, right? Because I think balance will help me understand when I need that input and when I don't.
Yeah. Because I guess it's quite easy when you're delegating opinions. You're sort of, I know the feeling. It comes down to that thing of like, what you want to do. You could just do it, but then you're going to check with everyone that what they think before you make your decision. And I guess sometimes that makes you almost feel like you can't make a decision, or you don't know how to make the decision. Yeah,
but I also understand that now when I make decisions, like many more people will see it.
Yeah.
And because of that, that's why I understand like alternate perspectives, because somebody from my team who understands what my dreams and goals are might say, hey, but have you thought about this interpretation, or have you thought about it from this perspective? Is that really what you want to do? And because everybody understands the big picture goals, and because there's so many eyes that are going to see each and every decision that I make publicly, I do understand that like having that input and having a good team, and I think is what helps like the most successful artists flourish, right? And I've seen the downfall of musicians who kind of like, they just tweeted something on a whim, or they got upset, and you see that downfall. And I know I could, I'm a Sagittarius. I speak my mind all the time. So I think it's important for me to understand that it is important to, I never want to do anything that's going to be offensive or hurt anybody or literally just not be what I want to output, like not be the type of music or statement that I want to make. And because I work with a group of people, we all kind of work together. We want to grow together. I'm going to tap in with them, and I'm going to check in with them to make sure that we're like all on the same page. But yeah, it's a bit of a struggle at times.
Yeah.
Because I'm definitely the person that like my whole life, like just did my own thing. You know what I mean? And like, but it's interesting, right? Because I'm also I'm the youngest child.
Right.
And as the youngest child, I also always like look to my older sisters and my parents as the decision makers. So there is an aspect of me that has been heavily reliant on other people's opinions as well. So I never want to get too lost in that version of me as well, relying on my team. So it's really like, it's just really like polar. You know what I mean?
No, for sure. What do you think, you talked about this sort of version of you that's the DIY version that you want to keep in there. Like, what do you think that you do to reconnect with that version?
I think it's, I think it's actually just doing things. But not doing things that it's just doing things that I can then tap in with my team with, but I've done it on my own still. So if I have a song idea, instead of like being like, hey, what, like, do you think this is a good beat production that I should jump on? And do you think this collaborator would be a good idea? Like, I try to come up with the decision on my own or come up with the idea on my own and structure it all in my mind. And then I'll tap in with my team for input. But at least that way I've challenged myself first to kind of come up with the concept, or come up with the idea. And that way the DIY version of me has still concocted this whole thing. I've done it all. But then before I put it out, then I'll tap in with my team. And that way I also have that input. And I'm not just kind of like doing something on a whim that I'm going to regret.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure. So it sounds like it's more like the opinions come in at the point where it possibly is going to go public. But before that, it's you.
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes things just go public. Sometimes there's some days when I'm just like, I got to do this post, and maybe I don't have access to my social media help or assistance, or maybe I don't know. Sometimes I don't have the capacity to like rely on somebody else's opinion, right? But I think I kind of know what things I can get away with doing that with, if that makes sense. I know what things I can share without input, or what things that I know are things I stand behind, and it's not like no one else's opinion is going to change that. So it's also identifying that. It's identifying those things that are super me. Like, one thing I try to remember is like my opinions on things, like, because when it comes to music, you could think, well, have you thought about a bridge? Have you thought about this, adding this to the chorus? But when it comes to like my opinions on like something I'm feeling, I try to like keep that me, because there's an authenticity to me that I don't want to get lost in the branding of everything. Yeah. Branding is important. And one thing that I've learned as well is like how to brand myself. I've learned how to shop for myself and like how to buy clothes that I like. So it's like, I'll buy the things that I like, and then I'll get someone maybe help me put it together. But like, if I'm doing an interview, like, I'll dress myself today. But if I'm going on a red carpet, okay, let's get some help, right?
Yeah.
There's degrees to it. So it's really just about, I think, maintaining that part of me and still doing things that I know that I believe make the most sense, and then determining where I need to kind of tap in and ask for help.
Yeah. You mentioned before about the adjustment to having people actually care about your music. I guess with the last 2 album length releases, you've sort of reached that point where there's acclaim, there's like people looking out for the music and stuff. What's that adjustment been like?
Like this career, this lifestyle is unfathomable. Like, still there's something about it that is just like, I just do. Like, sometimes I'm like, have I processed this? Like, do I understand? I didn't think it was possible. Like, I made music for so many years and actively put out music and practiced my craft without the expectation that it would ever turn into anything. It was just something that I did. But I always had a job. I always had a full-time job at the same time. I always was thinking about like my long-term goals that was outside of music. Like, how am I going to pay my bills? Like, I was always thinking the 9-to-5 realistic route. So the fact that my music started taking off in 2019, enough so that I was able to walk away from a full-time job, and I haven't had to go back in 3 years. It wasn't something that I could fathom. It's definitely like a dream come true, like literally. A lot of people that create art, one of their dreams is to be able to share, whether you're a visual artist, an actress, actor, whatever. One of your dreams is to be able to share this thing that you're very passionate about with other people. And I get to do that. I get to do that literally for a living. I was reflecting on this yesterday, actually, with the flight delay, because we were supposed to get in yesterday. So that kind of extra couple of hours, I literally just sat and thought about, like, what we're doing. And, like, feeling blessed that, like, who cares if the flight is delayed? Tomorrow I'm still going to hop on a flight and go to the UK to share my art and to talk to you about my art and my mind. And, like, that's wild. You know what I mean? It's such a blessing, and I also am able to talk about things that I've been impacted by. As a young Black woman from Canada, I feel like my narrative is often very dismissed. That was the whole concept behind the 13th Floor album, was the experiences of people like me being quite dismissed, having, your counterparts say, well, you're not from the States, you don't experience racism, it's not real, like that type of rhetoric, right? And not recognizing the pain that you walk with every day. And that's why the title 13th Floor even came to be, was because, the floor 13 in elevators is all around the world, like, doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But obviously it does exist. We just kind of have this understanding collectively that it's not a thing, so we don't acknowledge it, and we just say it's the 14th floor. And it was like interesting to me how it represented the parallels of narratives that young Black women in Canada have, or Black people in Canada have, and it's very obviously there. We know it exists. We all know like what the history has been, and the fact that it must impact us today, and yet we pretend, or at least many of my counterparts have pretended, my experiences are void, that they don't exist, much like the 13th floor, and that's where that came from. But to make a project about that and to talk about things that I thought would kind of alienate me and blackball me and make it so that I couldn't be a successful artist, to have that project be the catalyst of success, or like the thing that opened the doors for me to actually be able to be an active full-time musician who's moving towards more and more success every month, every year, has been really enlightening and a little bit confusing, honestly. But I guess I just gotta try to roll with the punches and recognize that sometimes those difficult things are the things that people need to hear, and by doing that, by talking about these things, which I think is almost like it's important to me to talk about these things, and it's like natural for me to talk about these things. It kind of just comes out. But I realize that it's not something that we get often, and the representation is lacking. And, just by existing, somehow people are like feeling that I'm knocking down walls or something like that, which is still like crazy to me. Like I remember when I first started performing actively, like people would always say, wow, like you're really good for a female rapper, or like I didn't expect that. And I would always have to ask myself, like, what did you expect? Like, and why did you expect less? So I guess that's the same thing, right? Like I realized over time, like what you do is unexpected. Like the space you occupy is not normal to people. And I'm like, oh, so all I have to do is like exist and go forward and further into that version of me to not specifically achieve success, but to be able to impact others, which has led to success. That's kind of what it's felt like, it's felt like just being my weird self and kind of like not shying away from that version of me. That's actually been more impactful for me than trying to conform. And conformity would never work for an artist like me or a person like me. It's just not a thing, as a female artist who doesn't over-sexualize myself, who is masculine presenting, who wears like, tomboy clothes and stuff like that. I know in the rap world, I'm not appealing to the people that are going to buy all the records. I know what the template is that sells, and I know the labels know what that is too. So I know they know what risks to take, what artists to take that risk with. I know I'm not that person. But I also know that the space that I'm occupying and the things that I'm doing are impacting people in a different way than the things that they've been exposed to, and they let me know that.
Yeah.
And because of that, who knows where I'm going to end up? I don't know if I'm going to achieve pinnacle success, but I'm already achieving pinnacle success literally by impacting people in ways that they have not been impacted. Like, look, who can say that? You know what I mean? And that's really rewarding feeling.
Yeah. I wondered whether you mentioned these two questions before about when someone says good for a female rapper, and you ask, what were you expecting and why were you expecting that? I wondered, from your point of view, thinking about those questions, what conclusions have you come to?
I mean, the conclusion I came to even back then was I'm a female, and there's an expectation that females are not as good at at rapping itself. That women are not as good at rapping. So, and I'm a very good rapper, right? I've really studied the craft, my craft. And before rapping, I took singing lessons for 7 years. I know how to use my diaphragm. I know how to breathe. I know how to enunciate. I know how to, you know what I mean? So all of these things work its way into like my actual output. So I feel like that level of being impressed is just not something that they thought that they would ever get from a woman or from at that time, a young girl. Which also, like, my age probably factored into that. Like, it's like, wow, like, this is like the smoke break time, You see all these guys on this bill, and then there's like, this one female performer. You think what I realized is that the average person thinks she's going to be the worst artist. Maybe in the singing world is different, because I also sing. In the singing world, those things are different. There's R&B, there's pop, right? You think that's what girls do. But the moment that it becomes rap, it's like, that's not, it's a masculine genre. It's a masculine industry. And so because of that, people don't feel like you can occupy that space effectively, right? It's also like, I used to work in music retail, and I worked in DJ and lights, and it kind of transferred to me also working in the rental department. So I'm lifting heavy speakers. I'm like running cabling. Like I can use this studio we're sitting in. People don't expect that because that's something that they associate with masculine energy, right? So people expect you to work in the band department knowing how to play the flute or like, you know what I mean? Or maybe guitar because acoustic, right? But the moment you get into like DJ lights, cable wiring, the drum department, that's a man's world for a lot of people. And so I occupy space in male dominated spaces. I've always been a tomboy. I've always played sports. And growing up, I was pushed out of those spaces and knew that I didn't fit in. You know what I mean? It's weird now to kind of like occupy that space and kind of like change people's minds a little bit about what it is that they didn't realize were their kind of ignorant, small-minded viewpoints on things.
Mm-hmm.
Even like my manager is a woman, my DJ is a woman. We travel together, and I see how people are like, whoa, like DJs are men, rappers are men, managers are men. And so like even as a team, we're shifting narrative just by existing, just by doing things that people think that we can't do. And I feel like that's a really powerful thing because on one hand, it changes people's mindset that is narrow-minded from like maybe when they go to another show and they see a female performer who's a rapper, they're not going to have that preconceived notion that she's not going to be good, But then on top of it, it also allows, I'm hoping, those people who do get pushed out of those spaces and who do feel like they can't occupy certain space to be like, oh, but she did it. She's a female rapper, and I haven't seen that before, but now I'm seeing it. So like maybe I could do it too, And I'm hoping that representation kind of does, filter into like what other people feel or think that they can do, because the fact that I'm the first person to win, the Juno for the rap category, or the first black woman to win a Polaris, like these things are weird to me, but at the same time, it's not that weird because I haven't seen examples of it before me. Like the examples that I have seen have been US based and like not Canadian based and very few and far between. That's why Lauryn Hill, is the one, the pinnacle, right? Because there's not many people like me, but there are. When I went to Palm Springs and I was playing the Dinah Shore show, it was like a lesbian festival. And there were so many women there that like looked like me and dressed like me and had hair like mine. And I could see that they were resonating with certain specific songs that I had. And it made me think, what representation in the music industry do they have? And I couldn't think of anybody. Like not one person. Whether they actually resonate with me as something like them or not, I don't know. But I looked at them and I resonated with myself in the audience. I'm like, I see me in you. Yeah. So I wonder if you're seeing you in me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So the people are out there. It's just that they're not being represented.
I feel like they're not, I feel like when you think about females in rap, and you think about the space that is occupied, one struggle that I have when it comes to like working with publicists, PR, all that is when they say, name 3 artists that you sound like so we can put you in a box. It's like, I struggle with that because I can't really think of, especially like current artists, that we would exist in the same space. It's hard to think where I would coexist with a lot of these artists. It's a blessing and a curse because if you're looking for me, I'm the one.
Yeah.
Who else is there? But if you're looking for commercial viability, I'm not the one.
Yeah.
Or maybe I am the one if you're willing to take a risk. So it's a weird place to be,
Yeah. When do you think that you realize this power of just like existing, basically?
Winning the Polaris Music Prize in 2019, 100%. Off of the strength of the 13th Floor project. And that's because when I made that project, I was surrounded by family, friends, and like new producers and stuff that did tell me, talk your truth, speak your truth. And so I did that. I was encouraged to do that. But I was very skeptical about how it would be received. And I didn't have high hopes for it because in the past, I didn't have good acknowledgement of those sorts of things. Talking about tensions between the black community and police felt like career suicide before I even started, And then I'm talking about stuff like that on the album, talking about being a young black woman when in Canada, when it's like less than 3% of us, who's my audience? Who am I speaking to? Are white people going to understand? Or are they going to feel victimized and then I'm losing 70 whatever % of my potential listener base? So I thought these things, but I still made the music anyway.
Yeah.
And winning that moment was like, oh, like wow, because I was gonna do it anyway, but I wasn't expecting to get accolades for it.
Mm.
I wasn't expecting to be acknowledged for it. And then it was an interesting thing because then it's like, oh, like you get this weird notion where some people are like, oh, you only won because of that. You won because of that political statement,
Sure.
not because you're good at rapping. And it's like, have you seen me rap? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's not just because of the fact that I'm speaking about important matters. It's because I'm also a good musician who understands the layers of a song. I understand the most beneficial bass line for the melody. I understand, like, I'm spending time with the hi-hat pattern. I'm playing with these files. It's not just that I'm saying something. It's the whole thing. And I think that's why I won. I think that I deserve to win. But then there was like those weird opinions where it's like, oh, you won because you're the token black girl, right? So then you're in the weird place where you're like, wow, I finally got past feeling like I can't speak about these things. Now I'm doing it, and now I'm questioning, am I even talented? Like, so
Yeah.
it's just so weird.
So those things do, like, even though obviously I can see from talking to you that you haven't accepted those things, but those things do sort of play on your mind at some level when people are coming and saying you only got it for this reason.
Yeah, 100%. It bothers me, but it doesn't bother me enough to like change what I'm doing, you know? Because even with the Junos now, you know, I saw some people, you know, it was in a category with all men, and all of the men have a lot of success, and are pretty well known. And then there was me, who I do have some success as well. But for me to achieve that type of streaming success, I just think it's going to be more difficult for me because of the space that I occupy. I'm not speaking about the same things. So I'm targeting a smaller niche market. I don't look like them. You know, I think that in hip hop, male listeners gravitate toward male listeners, and female listeners gravitate towards what men gravitate towards, right? So a lot of times it's going to be men dominating that space because men dictate. They're like, well, this rapper's good. And then the girls are like, oh, dope. Yeah, you're right. It's hard to convince people that what you're doing deserves space. And so I saw some opinions of people saying, you know, oh, she only got the award because she's LGBTQ, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I didn't even come out yet. Like, they must see something. But I didn't even speak about that yet. When you listen to the project, when you listen to Stock Exchange, there's only one song where you can really even gauge what my sexuality is because I'm still coming to terms with that in that time frame of my life.
Okay.
That wasn't even the focus of the project. But people will not even listen to the project. They'll watch one thing or read one tweet. They'll look at your image, and they'll kind of condemn you to what they think it's based on. Well, she won that because, you know, the landscape and the, you know what I mean? The landscape of today is inclusiveness. So they're just trying to be inclusive. Right?
Yeah,
and it's like, I mean, I can't speak to whether that is or whether that isn't. All I know is there was a time when there were white female rappers like Krayshawn using the N-word, and I knew there was no space for me back then. Right? So it's like, did you prefer that? Would you like to go back to that? Because I feel like what I'm doing is innovative and is more representative of what hip hop is than the things that we've seen at another time when I felt like somebody like me could not speak my truth. And if I did, I absolutely would not get him any sort of like main stage. Is that the change of the climate or the industry? Is that just the right time, the right place? I don't know. Like, I've always been this person, and I've always made music. I was in singing lessons from the age of 4 to the age of 11. I started rapping at 12. I've always done this. This is who I've always been. And I've also, you know, been raised by parents, you know, lucky enough to have, you know, 2 really loving, caring parents who, you know, have 5 black children, and they raised us from a very young age to care about and be proud of the fact that we're young black children, like, which I feel like a lot of my counterparts didn't have. So like me walking with that power and it working its way into my music, I feel like it's impactful because society has broken a lot of us down.
Yeah.
And I did grow up in an environment where like our neighbors would break our windows, call us the N-word, do all sorts of aggressive things. I did go to a school where I wasn't represented, wasn't accepted well. I was in French immersion and couldn't pick it up, and the teachers thought I was you know, needed anger management, and they did condemn me to that. They did, you know, I went through those kind of like condemning early experiences growing up in Toronto. And the reason that I walk with the strength that I do now is because I went through those things. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I can't answer truly like why I'm here or what exactly has allowed this to like align. I just know that like the more I focus on my music, the more things do continue to align, and the more that I'm validated that this is the direction I need to go in, the more that I feel like this is the most impact I've ever made in my life. You know, going to math class and figuring out like a algebra equation or whatever has never felt like I was contributing to society in any kind of way.
Yeah.
My life experiences and how I've interpreted those to be to be able to talk about race even in my music. A lot of people, they go through a lot of pain and trauma, and then they can't even talk about it without it destroying them or draining them or whatever. My parents gave me the strength that has allowed me to speak to those experiences, but with a strength, like with my chest out, because they've always kind of like countered it. Everything that we went through, my parents were like, no, that's not the reality. This is the reality. Right. And then you go through something else, and they're like, no, that's not the reality. This is the reality, you know? And my whole journey has really come out of that. I've put out so many projects. I don't know, if maybe like 7 projects at this point, but people only know of my last 2. But I would say my last 3 projects are really indicative of who I am, because my 5th project, that it's crazy to say my 5th project.
Yeah.
But my 5th project was called Flower City.
Right.
And it was inspired by moving to Brampton out of Toronto, where I lived in Toronto was just extremely racist and also impoverished, but like very white. So it was like white people with no money who were like, but you're worse. You know what I mean? So it was like real, like we were like, you know, they would call the cops on us for playing the piano too loud, crazy stuff like that. Just like harassment. To come from that and then move to Brampton, where it was like multicultural, I went from like, you know, I wasn't allowed to go outside. I wasn't allowed to have friends in Toronto because everything was like a risk. Like it was harmful. Our neighbors were abusive, you know? And then when I moved to Brampton, I was able to go to the park and play basketball. I had friends. I had Portuguese friends. I had Indian friends. I had Trinidadian friends. Like it was wild. I was like 8 or 9 at that time. And that was the first time that I learned to be social, which I think made me a little bit of a late bloomer. Probably contributed to some social awkwardness and stuff like that. But it also like was maybe why like I sat for so many years with my own thoughts and just kind of mulled over them, and I didn't really have any outlet for it, which Brampton became that outlet, you know? And that's why that Flower City project was like my like, you know, like my way of saying almost like thank you for this opportunity to like find myself. I don't know that I would have found myself if I stayed where I was in Toronto. I don't know that I would have ever been able to dissociate myself with the amount of anger I used to have growing up, because I'm a fairness police, you know what I mean? Like I feel like when you like through life, it's just important to me that people are treated fairly. That's always been a thing for me. My mom says.
Right.
And when I would get grounded, I'd write letters and leave them in their room that was like, I shouldn't have been grounded, reason 1. Like, and like she would never like ever like actually like rationalize any of these thoughts, but I was always like the fairness police person. Like if something wasn't fair, I would speak out about it. I think I always just felt like life wasn't fair. And I think if I didn't make that move at that time, I would really say if my parents didn't make that move, because it was really them that recognized that their children needed a better environment, and they were the ones that my mom was working 2 jobs, my dad was a stay-at-home dad at the time. They did what they needed to do to be able to afford to move out of Toronto to Brampton, like to be able to buy a house. Whereas before it was like, you know, like some form of project housing, right? They realized they want better for their kids, and they made that happen. And I think that it changed everything for me, because I am the type of person who I think would have taken on my environment. And I think I already was starting to. The teachers were saying I had anger management issues, blah, 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 all these things. When I moved to Brampton, I was deemed gifted. I was given an IEP. I was put in extra classes. I did extra work all the way till grade 12. I became like a nerd, you know? And I think it's because of the change of my environment. And I really think if I had stayed in that racist, unfair environment, that I would have taken on a very angry persona, and it would have affected who I am today. You know?
How do you, I listened to something interesting that you'd said about kind of the 13th Floor being the album that's against the system, but then ironically is the one that's accepted by the system too. what was that process like of like, because you said before that you didn't have high hopes for it. So what did it feel like actually releasing it out into the world and then watching how the tides kind of turned?
Yeah, it was incredible because actually I was able to quit my job a couple of days before the album dropped. It dropped like May 10th or something like that of 2019, and the Polaris was in September. So it actually was just the summer.
Right.
Right? It wasn't actually as long as people would think. It felt a little bit like an overnight success, but I know that it wasn't, right? Because I know that I'd start putting out music. You could backdate on YouTube and find me from '09. So that's 10 years of work. But it felt like an overnight success because it felt so quick, you know? But it's because I didn't expect anything of it. I expected for my experience to be the same as the last 10 years. No one's really going to care, you know? I don't know. Like, it felt so conflicting too because, again, like I felt like this is the right thing to do, right? Like, this is the right thing to do, right? That's what I felt. But at the same time, I started to think, like, am I being rewarded for the right reasons as well? Like, are the people that are rewarding me actually listening? That's what I'm saying. Or is it more just people aligning with what is supposed to be right?
Right.
Like, am I just the supposed to be right police kind of thing? Am I just the thing that's saying the things that you're supposed to say? But, like, are you living it? You know what I mean? Like, when you listen to my album and you hear these things, are you actually eliminating walking with ignorance? Are you actually having these difficult conversations at your bedroom or at your dinner table with your family? Or is it just like something that you can say outwardly, oh yeah, that she's dope. And we awarded her that. So that was a thing to struggle with. I still, you know, kind of struggle with that because we live in a society where I see examples that negate the things I fight for all the time. So it's like, is what I'm saying, are these words doing anything? Because they're words. I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not actually saving people's lives physically. And so you go through the roller coaster of feeling like what you're contributing to society is really important and not that important.
Yeah.
And I still go through that, but I always come back to thinking it is important. Even when I feel like it isn't, I find a way to come back. And maybe that's by having the right team, having family members, having the best fans in the world, you know, or maybe just the combination of all of it, you know?
What do you think are those examples of things that negate what you stand for?
Oh, like George Floyd, for example, being murdered, you know? And it's like, you write a song called 13 on the 13th floor about the 13th Amendment, how we're treated in Canada. And then after that, George Floyd's murdered. So then you write protest, right? And then something else is going to happen. So then you're going to write something else. So, like, is it actually making a change, right? Because the things that I'm speaking against are still very much happening.
Yeah.
Like, at an exponential rate. Still very, very, very actively happening. So it's like you feel like the climate of everything around you is shifting to accept these narratives that I feel like I used to talk about stuff like this in high school, and like black people would call me a Black Panther.
Right.
Not even white people. Other black people would be like, whoa, this is so much. You're a Black Panther. You know what I mean? Like, and I was like, really? For like just having like this like simple rhetoric that doesn't conform to, like, I'm not really doing anything radical out here. You know what I mean? I'm not out here picketing outside. I'm not wearing all black. I'm not really doing anything. I'm just like defying the standard opinion, you know? I would want to talk about colorism in high school. You know, why is it that we have this divide between light skin and dark skin? You know, why is it that all my black male friends come to me and tell me about all their light skinned girls that they want to talk, like, and I would listen and I'd be like, yeah, she's pretty. And then I would say, but why is it that way? And I don't have these conversations at the black bench. People wouldn't want to talk about that, you know? So then now I'm talking about it in my music and people are like, wow, yeah, you're right. But if I go outside, I'm still seeing examples of exactly what I'm talking about. So it's like, is the impact real or is it like kind of surface, you know?
Right.
But I remind myself from the feedback that I get that it doesn't happen overnight. That's just not how it works, you know? It's just, I got to keep doing this. I may never see the results, truly, of my output. And that's a good feeling to have because it's not, it lets me know I'm not doing it so I can see the results. I'm doing it because I know it will happen. I know that change is coming out of it. I just might not be seeing it. Maybe 10, 20 years from now, there will be some impact from a song that I've made 10, 20 years ago, right? And at least even talking about it, being willing to have that conversation is something that I didn't see, right? In high school, they weren't willing to talk about these things. So at least now there's a willingness to talk about it. Maybe 10, 20 years from now, we're going to see more of a willingness to actually push for and execute. There's that executing thing again, but execute those kind of like those changes and those mindset shifts, you know?
What do you think it was that made you the kid who was wanting to have the conversations versus the kids who didn't want to have the conversations?
I think my parents, like my dad and my mom, like what they just kind of surrounded us with kind of like, they just surrounded us with blackness in a society where it wasn't really like celebrated, you know? So like when I was young, we would go to like Naya Bingi events. We would go to Kwanzaa events. Like my dad would really try to like get us to tap into the culture. I would go to Marcus Garvey events, you know, with my family. My dad used to, well, he still does, but he like knits hats and he would have his vendor. And, you know, I would see all these elderly black people who like were so different from the society's standards or like what you see on TV. See very, you know, calm, caring, spiritual people, but not like religious, spiritual in a different way, you know. And I was seeing like, I think, examples of blackness that other people weren't seeing, like a royalness that other people weren't seeing. I would see the clothes that they would wear. My dad would make clothes and like make them with specific colors, and it would just feel like I'm a part of something, you know. My dad was always just spiritual in his essence. It was always, you know, I always knew that I was a descendant of Africa, but had Caribbean ancestry. Like a lot of people, when they grow up, I don't even think like it goes as deep as Africa. They're like, well, I'm Jamaican or I'm Bayesian or I'm from Ohio or something like that.
Yeah.
And for me, it was always like, no, like we were from the motherland at the end of the day. So I always knew like there was like this fundamental essence in my roots, and they always my parents just always reminded us of that. And then I had 3 older sisters who like also like represented that for me. Like I came from them too. And I just think our whole, you know, I was also raised a vegetarian, never ate meat in my life. We were just doing things different. So I feel like my mindset just shifted, like my brain grew different. The things I came to know were just different, you know what I mean? So yeah, I feel like that difference is also why, you know, because being an artist requires you to like stand out, you know. Fitting in doesn't really work. Like you kind of have to fit in and stand out in a way as an artist. And the fitting in part is where I struggle a little bit. That's why I think I'm a bit of a niche artist, but I also think that's my superpower. But I think standing out, literally, like that came from like, I came from an upbringing that just was not normal necessarily. And I'm very like, just very different, I would say, than like the examples. I've never seen like what I've seen growing up. I've never seen that on TV.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You mentioned before this sort of the importance to you of seeing these examples of blackness that you hadn't seen before. And I wonder, do you think that that's what you represent to a lot of other people?
I think so. And I also think it's an interesting juxtaposition, right? It's a blessing and a curse, because I also think sometimes because of that, I don't know if other black people see themselves in me. Because my experience is probably different than this textbook black experience. But that's another thing. We need to stop believing that there is a textbook black experience. You know, like I think that experience is attributed to very specific things. No dad, single mother, growing up in a home with you know, growing up impoverished, growing up in the hood. There are reasons why that is a lot of our narrative. Right? There are aspects of that are a part of my narrative too. We grew up in some form of government housing because it was subsidized. Maybe not to the degree of some individuals. Maybe it wasn't the worst hood. Like it wasn't like a hood, but it was like not a great area, you know. And that's because my immigrant parents came here with not a lot and they had to work. Right? So a lot of black people's experience in Toronto, for example, like where I grew up, is similar to that because their parents also immigrated there and didn't come with a lot and had to work from the way up, and all they could afford was housing in this area or this area or this area, right? So it makes sense that is a lot of our narratives, but it is not indicative of all of our stories.
Mhm.
And that's also an ignorance that I'm hoping that like being different will break. Like I speak to the stories of my own growth, and as a black woman, I'm sure many different black people resonate with aspects of that.
Yeah.
But it's still my story.
Yeah.
It's not a black story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that isn't really a thing. You know what I'm saying? To me.
But keeping that sort of stereotypical kind of black experience as you described, I guess, keeps the cycle of oppression
It
going.
does.
Yeah.
It does. A lot of the music that flourishes in Toronto speaks specifically to that, you know, like growing up in the hood. Like the hood, you know what I mean? And being maybe like a child who only has your mother in your life. That's like such a common story. It's such a painful story. And I think that we absolutely need artists to speak to that as well. We do need space for artists to speak to all of their experiences. But we also need space for black people that haven't lived that exact experience to also speak. Because not everybody grows up in that world. And not everybody can relate to those artists. We need representation of all types of blackness. Right? Straight blackness, queer blackness as well. That's another thing, because this new music I'm working on, I spent a lot of time talking about, you know, what it's like to be black. Now I'm introducing a little bit more of my interpersonal relationships, my things I've learned socially over the last couple of years. And my sexuality is one of those things. And as a Caribbean, you know, Jamaican and Bayesian, you know, person, those two things are opposing. Very much opposing.
Yeah.
So now I'm kind of moving into a new realm where I know there's like a distinction there that some people aren't going to get, but it's my experience and I have to speak to it. It just is what it is.
Yeah. Talking to you has really brought up this thing for me of like, because you mentioned before, if you were singing primarily, it would be different. And I suppose it's brought into focus for me the kind of first person sort of approach of hip hop. Are we as listeners not challenging ourselves enough to think, to empathize with the artist and not think, okay, well, I'm a man, so therefore I need to listen to other men and feel like I'm in that person's perspective, if that makes sense. Because if it's first person, generally, it's not like when you sing a lot of songs, they're not necessarily reflecting on my experience as the singer.
Right.
I wonder if that's got something to do with this thing of like a lot of men don't want to imagine themselves as a woman in a first person perspective.
I think that's a big factor, 100%. But it is ironic because the most popular the most popular hip hop from female artists of today is, I think, even further away from their experiences a lot of the time, because they're talking about, am I allowed to swear? Yeah, so they're talking about fucking men, right? And they're talking about it in very vulgar ways, in the same ways that these male rappers talk about it with women. I might be talking about something that's more familiar with you, because I might talk about fucking women, right? So it's interesting because there is still this societal representation of what gets big. Like, and so the people that determine which artists are going to be big is not even the black audience, right? It's like people with money, people who invest in the artists. Because as an artist, you're just a commodity at the end of the day. You're just like gold or silver or fuel or something. You're just this valuable thing, right? That somebody or an entity or a group of people invest in. And so they're thinking about how to sell that thing. And ironically, for some reason, like selling female over-sexualized artists, maybe the guys don't have to listen to them so much, but because there's a look or a sexual appeal, then that's what sells. And then for the men, they can speak to kind of like the strife side more so, or I really don't know what it is that makes it so different. That makes me so different in this realm. I guess because I just am it. I don't know. I can't think outside of it as much as I would like to, just for the sake of this conversation. But I do think the first person narrative thing is a factor, 100%. But I wonder how much.
Yeah. I wonder if people are starting to challenge themselves a bit more, and you know, I suppose that's why a lot of the rap that's coming out from women is starting to become popular, and there is a shift happening. And you know, I know there is a lot of other factors, right? Like a lot of people say that women are the tastemakers, don't they? And that men follow what women like. So perhaps that's part of it. But it is interesting to think, I guess, of the first person narrative as being part of this thing. When you were talking before, talking about how people want to sort of see themselves in the artist, it made me think, why can't more people challenge themselves to see parts of themselves in somebody who's completely different to them?
Right. But I am starting to see it a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. Like I do think that some people are starting to recognize, because I think really what it takes is time. I think people have to see it a million times before they're like, huh, right? And I think I'm that artist that you guys see a million times before you're like, maybe there's some merit here, or maybe like this one song did, like kind of penetrate a little bit. Because I am starting to see like certain artists reach out that like they exist in a very different realm, reaching out and saying, yo, you're the truth, or you're dope, like, which I didn't see before. I think it just takes longer, people resonate with what society tells them is attractive or valuable or whatever. So because I'm not that, I think it's taking more time for people to come to that determination on their own. That, I actually kind of rock with this. Like, I've seen this person's face pop up so many times. Initially, it didn't impact because, well, maybe she's not, her tits ain't hanging out her top, so that didn't pull me in. She's rapping about being a woman, that didn't pull me in. But then maybe like there's something eventually that they can attribute themselves to. And so I feel like it's just like pound to the pavement. Like, you just got to work until more and more people get it. And that's kind of been my journey, is just being myself and seeing how many people keep getting it. Yeah. And you just have to hope that more and more people will get it. But if they don't, then they don't. Like, I think about like how a lot of artists, like, the template is kind of clear, so you could just do it. You could just, like, if a female rapper wants to be successful, you could think about the female successful rappers that exist. Right now in our time, we have Mulatto, Flo Milli, like all these dope artists. And you could kind of look at like maybe like a couple of things that exist amongst all of them. And then you could be like, okay, well, if I implement that, maybe that'll be helpful. Implement that, it'll be helpful. Right? But it's like, I know, like, I wouldn't even be able to. Like, the reason that they're successful is because hopefully that's who they actually are. Yeah. You know what I mean? We just found the people that are actually like that occupy that space. But that's like ideally not them conforming. At least those two artists I named, I don't think they're conforming. And the majority of these artists, Meg Thee Stallion, I don't feel like they're conforming to be this person. I think that there is a formula that they fit. Yeah. And I feel like that's still them. Yeah. It ain't me though. Like, it's so far from me. So it's like, how do I create a formula for me? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's just what I'm doing. You know, I'm just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think, I don't remember the exact quote, but in Jay-Z's book Decoded, he talks about how ultimately no one else has the same experience as him, but what people are connecting to is the human emotion in the music. So I guess that is something where eventually, no matter who we're listening to, there's something just human, emotion-wise, that we can get out of it.
Yeah, I would hope so. Because I know for me, my favorite artist growing up was 50 Cent. And I had never been shot. Yeah. And I'd never been through, I wasn't from New York. Like, but he was my favorite artist because of his ability to tell a story that made me feel things. And so alternatively, like, why can it not be the same, like, based on gender? Like, that doesn't really matter. I mean, we live in a time now where gender matters less than ever. So really, we should be tapping into the human experience, because I feel like at the end of the day, that is what it is about. I feel like I've always been on that wavelength, though, or on that train. And I feel like also women have always, I think women have generally been able to do that. Mm-hmm. Because hip-hop has been dominated by males, and we've been listening from when, right? There's been obviously people like Foxy Brown, Lil' Kim, contributing, but it's still male-dominant. As it was then, it is now, And I feel like we are able, a lot of times women are able to listen to these experiences and still interpret from it. But I feel like it's harder. I've seen it be more difficult for men. They feel like, or at least some of them have communicated to me, it's just like, I don't see myself in that. I'm not getting anything from that. And I don't know, maybe that comes from some inability to think outside of that male realm, that male gaze. I'm not sure. But my whole life I've been listening to artists that live experiences that I don't. And that's some of the most impactful music is music that teaches me something that I didn't know. So that's just, I think eventually it's going to make more sense to people, and I just got to keep going, and it'll work itself out.
So to wrap up, what are you most proud of about what you've achieved so far?
I'm most proud of not conforming, or not even attempting to conform, and still being able to achieve what I've achieved. I'm most proud of not silencing my voice to appease the listener. I'm most proud of being willing to take a chance on myself and take that risk, and it being rewarded. I'm most proud of the awards and accolades I've been receiving and the music that I've made. And I'm very, very proud of the new music that I'm making now, and the journey that I'm about to ensue and undertake, and new audiences that I'm going to reach, and the success I've already achieved and will achieve. And yeah, I think what I'm most proud of is taking pain and turning it into power.
And lastly, what does success look like to you?
I think success is being able to work for myself and not yes, I still rely on and function on somebody else's schedule and calendar, but ultimately it's up to me. If I don't want to do the thing, I just don't have to do the thing. And I think outside of making the music and the obvious gratification that comes from literally making music all my life and now getting to make it with actual listeners who actually care and they're actually waiting for the drop, that's the best feeling in the world. But also just not falling victim to the things I speak about in my music, not adapting who I was out of who I am, and not being able to find myself again. I feel like I know myself, and although there are so many aspects of myself that I don't know, I know myself enough to know that I don't know myself, if that makes sense. And I feel like the direction I'm going in is so clear. I feel like I'm validated all the time with these opportunities that just keep reminding me that I'm doing great things. And then every time I feel disheartened, the work doesn't stop, and then the reward will happen. Maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months. I'll always be reminded that this is the right direction. Someone will always tell me that they were impacted in some way, that I'm like, I'm so glad that you had this song at that time, because you're telling me that you needed it. It's really, it's a dream come true. I know it's probably cliche to say, but I'm sure it's not. If you think about the realities of being a musician, that's a low ratio of people who get to do what I do. And ultimately I'm just so grateful that I've done what I've done, and that I get to keep doing what I'm doing.
Thank you for listening to Making Conversation with Grant Brydon, featuring Haviah Mighty. If you liked this episode, then please be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you're listening to podcasts. You can listen to Haviah Mighty's Stock Exchange mixtape on streaming services now, and check out my book, Life Lessons from Hip Hop, which is available from all good booksellers. Thank you to Levi's for welcoming us into House of Strauss to record, as well as Eroy Chan for the graphic design, and John Phonics for the instrumental that I'm talking over right now. You can connect with me on social media at Grant Brydon, and Haviah at Haviah Mighty on all platforms. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode.